Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, I want to tell you about a man who actually existed. Not a myth, not a legend, a real person with real historical records, real witnesses, and a real death that no one could explain. His name was Johann Georg Faust, and according to multiple documented sources, eyewitness testimonies, and official church records, he made a deal with the devil. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, an actual contract, signed in blood, witnessed by others, promising 24 years of unlimited power in exchange for his immortal soul. And when those 24 years expired in 1540, people found his body in a locked room, torn apart, limbs twisted at impossible angles, his head facing backward, blood on the walls, the smell of sulfur so strong it made people vomit. No one was in the room with him. The door was locked from the inside. There was no explanation, just a body, a contract, and a terror that spread across Germany so completely that people still whisper about it 500 years later. You've heard the story before, right? Faust, the scholar who sold his soul. It's been retold in plays, operas, movies, books. Goethe wrote about him. Marlowe wrote about him. Everyone knows the tale. But here's what most people don't know. Johann Georg Faust was real. He lived in Germany in the late 1400s and early 1500s. He was a wandering magician, astrologer, and alchemist. He performed tricks that witnesses swore were impossible. He predicted events that came true. He possessed knowledge he shouldn't have had access to. And multiple people, including monks, scholars, and officials, testified that Faust openly boasted about his pact with Satan. This isn't folklore. This is documented history, with names, dates, location, and a death scene so horrifying that the local church refused to bury his body in consecrated ground. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, I'm going to tell you the true story, the real Faust. Not the romanticized version, the actual historical figure who terrified an entire generation. Because sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that actually happened. And this one keeps me up at night. Let's begin in 1480, in a small German town where a boy was born, a boy who would grow up to challenge God, bargain with Satan, and die in a way that still has no rational explanation. Are you ready? Good. Close your eyes, and let me tell you about the man who sold his soul, the wandering magician of Germany. Germany, Johann Georg Faust was born around 1480 in Nittlingen, a small town in southwestern Germany. This much we know from historical records. Birth records were sketchy in that era, but multiple sources place his origin there. He came from a peasant family, not nobility, not scholars, just ordinary people. But young Johann was different. He was intelligent, curious, restless, the kind of child who asked too many questions and never accepted because God wills it as an answer. In his teens, Faust studied at the University of Heidelberg. Again, this is documented. University records show a Georges Helmstetter ex-Kennettlingen, which historians believe was Faust using a different surname, a common practice then. He studied theology, philosophy, the classical texts, everything a good scholar of that era was supposed to learn. But Faust was also drawn to the forbidden knowledge, alchemy, astrology, magic, the occult sciences that the church officially condemned but everyone secretly practiced. After leaving university, Faust didn't become a priest or a teacher. He became a wanderer, a traveling performer, a man who went from town to town offering his services, fortune-telling, astrological charts, medical advice, and magical demonstrations. The historical records from this period are scattered but consistent. Multiple towns have records of Faust the magician visiting. Sometimes he was welcomed, sometimes he was chased out, but he always left an impression. In 1506, there's a record from the city of Gelsen of a Dr. Faust who performed incredible feats. In 1513, records from Erfurt mention Magister Georgius Faust, who demonstrated his arts at the university. By his 30s, Faust had developed a reputation. He was known throughout southern Germany. Not famous, Exactly. More like notorious. People knew his name, and they whispered about him. Because the things Faust did weren't normal, even by the standards of an era when magic was widely believed in. Faust's abilities stood out. They were too accurate, too powerful, too impossible. And people started asking, how does he do it? Where does his knowledge come from? Faust had an answer, but it was an answer that terrified everyone who heard it. In one documented account from 1528, at the court of the Bishop of Bamberg, Faust allegedly made a table levitate. Multiple witnesses, including educated clergy, swore they saw a heavy wooden dining table rise off the ground and hover in midair. Another account from Erfurt describes Faust summoning spirits. During a gathering of university scholars, he claimed he could bring forth the ghosts of famous historical figures. Witnesses reported seeing shadowy forms that resembled ancient Greek philosophers. Whether this was clever trickery or something else, we can't know, but the witnesses believed it was real. Faust was also famous for his predictions. He would tell merchants which ships would sink. He'd tell farmers when droughts would come, and according to records, his predictions came true with disturbing frequency. Now you might think, clever charlatan, stage magician, con artist, and maybe that's true. The Renaissance was full of frauds who exploited people's superstition. But here's where it gets weird. Faust didn't hide behind mystery. He didn't pretend his powers came from God or ancient wisdom. He was shockingly honest about his source. He said it was the devil, openly, publicly, in front of witness. In 1520, a Franciscan monk named Johann Klungs documented meeting Faust in Erfurt. Klungs wrote that Faust boasted of his familiarity with the devil, and claimed to have made a pact for 24 years. Think about that. This wasn't hearsay. This was a monk's direct testimony. Faust told him, to his face, that he'd sold his soul. Another account from Melanchthon, one of Martin Luther's closest associates, describes Faust as a man who openly declared his pact with Satan, and said the devil was his master. Most magicians of that era hid behind religious pretense. They claimed to work through God's grace, or angelic assistance, or natural philosophy. Faust did the opposite. He bragged about his demonic connections. Why would anyone do that? Why would you openly claim to serve Satan in a deeply religious society where witches were burned alive? Either Faust was completely insane, which seems unlikely given his obvious intelligence and success, or he was telling the truth. And that possibility, that's what terrified people. Everyone had heard of him. The magician who served the devil, the scholar who traded his salvation for earthly power. Martin Luther himself mentioned in Luther's Table Talk, a collection of his conversations and sermons. He refers to that damned Faust, and warns his followers to avoid him. Luther believed Faust was genuinely in league with demons. Philip Melanchthon, Luther's colleague and a prominent Protestant reformer, wrote extensively about Faust. Melanchthon had apparently met Faust personally, and found him frightening and deeply troubled. He described Faust as a man who lived in constant fear of what awaited him when his contract expired. Think about that. These weren't ignorant peasants. Luther and Melanchthon were among the most educated men in Europe, reformers, theologians, critical thinkers, and they believed Faust was damned. The rumors multiplied. In Wittenberg, Faust allegedly demonstrated his power by producing a feast out of thin air during Lent, when fasting was mandatory. Witnesses claimed exotic foods appeared on empty tables, roasted meats, tropical fruits, fine wines, things that shouldn't exist in a German winter. In Nuremberg, Faust was said to have flown. Multiple witnesses reported seeing him rise into the air and travel across the city without touching the ground. Was it a trick, wires, optical illusion, or something else? In Ingolstadt, Faust was expelled from the city. The official record states he was banned for necromancy and satanic arts, not fraud, not charlatanism. The authorities believed he was genuinely practicing dark magic, but the most disturbing rumors were about Faust's companion. Multiple witnesses testified that Faust traveled with someone, a man sometimes described as a dog, sometimes as a shadowy figure, sometimes as a well-dressed gentleman. This companion never spoke to others, only to Faust, and witnesses said there was something wrong with him. His presence made people uncomfortable. Animals avoided him. Candles flickered when he entered rooms. Faust called him Mephistopheles, his demon, his familiar. the spirit assigned to serve him during the term of their contract, and according to everyone who saw this companion, he wasn't human. There was something profoundly wrong with him that couldn't be explained or dismissed. By 1530, Faust's reputation was solidified. He was the devil's man, the sorcerer who damned himself, a warning to others, but his time was running out, and as the years passed, people noticed something. Faust was getting scared. The night in the forest. The exact details of Faust's pact are documented in several sources, though the sources sometimes differ on specifics, but they agree on the core facts. Sometime around 1516, when Faust was in his mid-30s, he performed a ritual in a forest near Wittenberg. Multiple accounts mention this. It was a deliberate, premeditated act, not an accident, not a moment of weakness, a conscious decision. According to later testimonies from people Faust confided in, he spent months preparing. He studied ancient grimoires, forbidden texts that described how to summon demons. He gathered specific materials, candles made from human fat, circles drawn with grave dirt, incantations in languages that predated Christianity. On the chosen night, Faust entered the forest alone. The moon was new, darkness absolute. He drew a circle in a clearing, lit his candles, and began his invocation. He called out to Satan, not symbolically, actually called, loudly, challenging the Prince of Darkness to appear. And according to Faust's own later admissions, something answered. The accounts describe what happened next. A terrible wind. Though the air was still, the smell of sulfur, the sound of laughter that came from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously, and then a presence. Not a monster with horns and who, the devil, Faust said, appeared as a sophisticated gentleman, well-dressed, articulate, charming, the kind of person you'd trust instinctively, which was of course the point. They spoke. Satan offered a deal. His terms were simple. 24 years. During that time, Faust would have unlimited knowledge and power. He could perform any feat, know any secret, achieve any goal. Demons would serve him. Reality would bend to his will. In exchange, at the end of 24 years, his soul belonged to hell, forever. No reprieve, no appeals, eternal damnation. Faust, according to his own testimony, tried to negotiate. 24 years seemed short. Could it be longer? Could there be an escape clause? Satan refused. 24 years. Final offer. Take it or leave it. And Faust, driven by pride, ambition, or desperation, took it. 24 years of power. The terms of the contract were specific, documented in multiple sources, almost word for word identical across different accounts, which suggests they're based on an actual document. First, for 24 years, Faust would be served by a demon named Mephistopheles. This demon would obey Faust's commands, provide him with knowledge, perform magic on his behalf, and protect him from harm. Second, Faust would have access to all knowledge, past, present, and future. He could know the secrets of kings, the location of treasures, the outcome of battles. Nothing would be hidden from him. Third, Faust would have the ability to perform miracles, not in God's name of course, but real, tangible supernatural feats. He could fly, summon objects from nothing, control the weather, transform his appearance. Fourth, Faust would enjoy worldly pleasures, wealth, fine food, beautiful companions, anything his flesh desired. He could, but in exchange, at the end of 24 years, at midnight on the anniversary of the pact, Satan would come to collect. Faust's soul would be dragged to hell. His body would be given to demons, his fate sealed for eternity. Additionally, Faust agreed to renounce God, to never pray, to never seek redemption, to never enter a church except to mock it. He was Satan's property now, completely, irreversibly. The contract specified, if Faust tried to break the agreement, if he repented or sought God's forgiveness, the demons would tear him apart immediately. Not at the end of 24 years, right away, violently, publicly. So Faust was trapped. Even if he regretted his choice, There was no way out. The only options were to enjoy the power while he had it, or die trying to escape. According to the accounts, Faust signed immediately, no hesitation, no last-minute doubt. Just a quill, a parchment, and the worst decision of his life. Signed in blood, the contract itself became famous. Multiple witnesses claimed to have seen it, though none survived to modern times, but the descriptions are consistent. It was written in Latin, the language of educated Europeans, but also of the Catholic Church, a deliberate mockery. The text was reportedly ornate, formal, like a legal document, which in a sense it was, but the signature, that was written in blood, Faust's blood. He cut his own finger and used it to write his name at the bottom of the parchment. Why blood? Because blood, according to medieval belief, contained the soul. By signing in his own blood, Faust was literally giving a piece of himself to Satan. It was binding, permanent, unbreakable. One witness, a scholar named Beatus Renanus, claimed to have seen the contract in Faust's possession. Years later, he described it as a document of unspeakable evil, written in words that burned to read. Whether this was literal or metaphorical, we can't know, but the fear was real. After signing, Faust reportedly collapsed, whether from blood loss, shock, or the spiritual trauma of damning himself. The accounts don't specify, but when he woke, Mephistopheles was standing over him. Not a vision, not a hallucination, a real, physical presence. The demon who would be Faust's servant and his prison guard. For the next 24 years, Faust asked his first question. Was this real? Did I really just sell my soul? Mephistopheles smiled. Yes, doctor, welcome to our service. And Faust realized there was no going back. The deal was done, his fate sealed. 24 years, starting now. The clock was ticking. Impossible feats at this. After signing the pact, Faust's abilities increased dramatically. The tricks that had impressed people before became genuinely terrifying demonstrations of power. In 1520, at the court of Duke Wilhelm III of Bavaria, Faust performed what witnesses described as miracles of darkness. He made objects disappear and reappear. He caused flames to dance without fuel. He read sealed letters without opening them. But the most famous demonstration happened at a feast. It was winter, no fresh fruits available. Yet Faust waved his hand and a table filled with grapes, oranges and other exotic fruits that shouldn't exist in Bavaria in February. The Duke demanded to know how this was possible. Faust smiled and said, "I have friends in warm places." Everyone in the room knew what he meant, and they stopped eating immediately. Another well-documented incident occurred in Erfurt in 1525. Faust was at a tavern when a group of students challenged him. "If you're so powerful," they said, "show us something impossible." Faust agreed. He asked them what they wanted to see. Julius Caesar. One student joked, "Bring us Julius Caesar." Faust raised his hand and spoke words in a language no one recognized. The room darkened, the temperature dropped, and in the center of the tavern, a figure appeared, a Roman soldier, dressed in ancient armor. Real armor, not a costume. The figure didn't speak, just stood there, staring until Faust dismissed it with another gesture. The students fled. Several later testified to this event in writing, swearing it was real. By the late 1520s, Faust's reputation was such that towns would ban him preemptively. Ingolstadt expelled him without him even entering. Nuremberg posted guards at the gates with orders to turn him away, but other places welcomed him. Nobles, curious about his powers, paid him handsomely for private demonstrations. He became wealthy, not through fraud, but through genuine displays of ability that no one could explain. And through it all, Mephistopheles was there, always in the shadows, always watching, a constant reminder of the price Faust had paid. The demon companion. Witnesses who saw Mephistopheles described him differently. To some, he appeared as a monk in black robes. To others, a nobleman in fine clothes. To still others, a dog that followed Faust everywhere. But everyone agreed there was something wrong with him. something that made your skin crawl, something that animals could sense but humans couldn't quite articulate. One account from a servant at a noble house where Faust stayed describes Mephistopheles sitting in a corner, motionless for hours, never blinking. When the servant tried to speak to him, Mephistopheles turned his head in one smooth motion, like a puppet, and stared. The servant later said, his eyes were empty, like looking into a well with no bottom. Horses refused to approach Mephistopheles. Dogs would bark and retreat. Even candles seemed to burn dimmer when he was near. Faust, for his part, treated Mephistopheles with a strange mixture of command and fear. He would order the demon to fetch things, perform tasks, provide information, and Mephistopheles would obey, always. Perfect, but there was a sense, even to outside observers, that the power dynamic wasn't what it appeared. Faust might give orders, but Mephistopheles was the one in control, like a jailer allowing a prisoner to feel free while never letting them out of sight. One of the most chilling accounts comes from Philip Melanchthon, who claimed to have met Faust in the 1530s. Melanchthon wrote, "I spoke with Faust about his soul. He seemed terrified. He wanted to repent, but he said his companion would not allow, that if he even tried to pray, the demon would know, and the consequences would be immediate and horrifying." Melanchthon tried to convince Faust to seek God's mercy anyway, to take the risk, to choose damnation on his own terms rather than Satan's. But Faust refused. He was too afraid, and so he continued. Year after year, serving his 24-year sentence in luxury and terror, fame and fear. By the 1530s, Faust was one of the most famous people in Germany. Not celebrated exactly, but known. Everyone had heard of him. The magician, the devil's servant, the damned man. Parents told their children, "Don't end up like Faust." Priests used him as an example in sermons. This is what happens when you reject God. He became a cautionary tale while still alive. But fame came with problems. Witch hunters took note. The Inquisition, though less powerful in Protestant Germany than in Catholic regions, still had agents, and a man who openly admitted to serving Satan was an obvious target. Faust had to move constantly, never staying in one place more than a few weeks, always one step ahead of authorities, mobs, or zealots who wanted to see him burn, and the pressure was building. By the mid-1530s, people who'd known Faust earlier noted a change. He was drinking heavily. His performances were more desperate, his boasts more hollow, because the years were passing, and everyone, including Faust, was doing the math. 1516 plus 24 equals 50. What did he learn? During his 24 years of power, Faust had access to knowledge no human should possess, and according to various accounts, he used it extensively. He knew secrets about royal families, illegitimate children, hidden affairs, political conspiracies. Nobles who consulted him would be shocked when he revealed things about them that no one could possibly know. He knew the location of lost treasures, buried gold, sunken ships. He could tell merchants where to dig and they'd find riches that had been lost for centuries. He knew future events. Not all of them, apparently. His demonic knowledge had limits, but enough to be disturbing. He predicted deaths, wars, succession crises, and according to records, he was right more often than chance should allow. But the knowledge came with a price, not the obvious price of his soul, but a more immediate cost, the burden of knowing. Several accounts describe Faust as being tormented by what he'd learned. One witness, a scholar who spoke with Faust in the 1530s, reported that Faust said, "I know things I wish I didn't, the secrets of powerful men, the nature of hell, the face of God, which I will never see again. Knowledge is not power. Knowledge is a prison." Faust apparently tried to write down some of his knowledge. He kept journals, grimoires, notebooks filled with occult formulas and forbidden secrets. But after his death, these were all destroyed by church authorities. Only fragments survived in the accounts of people who saw them. One fragment that was recorded, a spell for summoning minor demons. The instructions were precise, methodical, scientific almost, which is what made it so terrifying. This wasn't mystical nonsense. This read like a recipe. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. as if summoning demons was as straightforward as baking bread. Did the knowledge make Faust happy? No. All accounts suggest the opposite. The more he learned, the more miserable he became, because he could see the world clearly now. All its cruelty, injustice, meaninglessness, and he knew his own fate awaited him in hell. Knowledge without wisdom, power without purpose. That was Faust's curse, wealth beyond measure. Faust became very wealthy during his 24 years. Nobles paid him fortunes for demonstrations. Merchants paid for predictions. Desperate people paid for cures, love potions, revenge spells. He lived well, fine clothes, expensive wine, the best accommodations wherever he traveled. Money was never a problem. But wealth, like knowledge, brought no satisfaction. Multiple accounts describe Faust as being unable to enjoy his riches. He'd throw lavish parties but sit in the corner, drinking alone, watching others with dead eyes. One witness described seeing Faust in a tavern, surrounded by admirers, people buying him drinks and asking for stories. But Faust looked like a man at his own funeral, watching people celebrate something he could no longer feel. There's a famous anecdote, possibly apocryphal but repeated in multiple sources. A beggar once approached Faust and asked for money. Faust gave him a large gold coin. The beggar, shocked, asked why he was so generous. Faust replied, "Because you're freer than I am. You're poor, but your soul is your own. I have everything, and I own nothing. Not even myself." The beggar, according to the story, threw the coin back and ran away, terrified. By the late 1530s, Faust was giving away money, not out of generosity, but because it meant nothing. What good is wealth when you know your time is measured in months? When every coin is just another reminder that you traded eternity for temporary pleasures? Witnesses noted that Faust stopped eating much, stopped sleeping regularly, stopped caring about his appearance. The man who once dressed in fine clothes started looking haggard, thin, haunted, because the calendar was advancing, and there was nothing wealth could buy that would save him. People who saw Faust in 1538 and 1539 described a man falling apart. He drank constantly, not for pleasure, but to quiet the terror, to dull the knowledge of what was coming. He had nightmares. Multiple accounts mention that he'd wake screaming in the night, claiming he'd seen hell in his dreams, seen what awaited him, felt the flames, heard the screaming. He tried to escape once. In 1539, he fled to Switzerland, thinking maybe distance would matter. Maybe if he was far from where he'd made the pact, the contract wouldn't be enforceable. It didn't work. Mephistopheles found him within days, and Faust returned, broken, knowing there was no escape. He begged God for mercy. According to several witnesses, Faust would sometimes break down and pray, despite knowing it was forbidden by his contract. He'd fall to his knees and sob, begging for forgiveness he knew wouldn't come. But every time he tried to repent, Mephistopheles would appear, silent, reminding Faust of the consequences of breaking the pact. One witness, a monk named Father Clausen, encountered Faust in early 1540. Clausen later wrote, "I have never seen a man so consumed by terror. He knew he was damned. He knew what was coming, and there was nothing anyone could do. I offered to hear his confession. He laughed and said, 'Father, confession requires hope. I have none. In 6 months I will be in hell, and all your prayers cannot change that.' By the summer of 1540, Faust was barely functioning. He gave his last public performance in June, and witnesses said he seemed like a ghost, going through the motions, waiting for the end. And then in late August, Faust made one final journey, to the town of Staufen im Breisgau, to an inn where he'd stayed before. He told people he was going there to die, and no one doubted him, because everyone knew his 24 years were up, and the devil had come to collect. 1540, the year Faust's contract expired. The year everyone had been waiting for, including Faust himself. The exact date of the pact's creation was uncertain, but Faust apparently knew it precisely. He told multiple people that year, "I have until August 24th. then my soul is forfeit. In January 1540, Faust visited several of his old haunts, not to perform, not to demonstrate his powers, just to say goodbye, to see places one last time before his fate was sealed. He went to Erfurt, where he'd studied. He walked through the university grounds. Now banned from entering, students who recognized him whispered and pointed. The damned man, the devil's servant, walking among them like a ghost. In March, he visited Wittenberg, the city of Luther, possibly hoping for some last-minute intervention from Protestant reformers. But Luther, hearing of Faust's presence, preached a sermon condemning him. That man, Luther thundered, has chosen his fate. Let him reap what he has sown. Faust left Wittenberg that night. According to one account, he stood outside Luther's church and shouted at the closed doors, "I didn't choose damnation. I was seduced. I was tricked. Is there no mercy? No forgiveness?" The doors remained closed, and Faust walked away, weeping. By summer, Faust's condition had deteriorated severely. He looked like a corpse, skin pale, eyes sunken, hands trembling constantly. He could barely hold a cup without spilling. He told anyone who would listen, "I made a mistake. I was young, ambitious. I didn't understand what I was trading. 24 years seemed like forever. Now it's gone, and hell awaits." But when people asked if he regretted it, Faust's answer was strange. Regret. Every second. But would I choose differently? I don't know. I've seen things no human has seen. Known secrets that would break your mind. I've lived more in 24 years than most people live in a lifetime. But the price is too high. I know that now. Too late. Vague, desperate prayers. In July 1540, Faust did something he hadn't done in decades. He entered a church, not to mock it, but to pray. The church was in Nuremberg, a small chapel. Early morning. Faust thought he'd be alone, but a priest was there, preparing for morning mass. The priest recognized Faust immediately, and instead of throwing him out, he invited him to kneel at the altar. Faust collapsed, literally collapsed, fell to his knees and wept. "Father," he sobbed, "I'm damned. I know I'm damned. But is there nothing, no mercy, no hope? Can God forgive even me?" The priest, moved by Faust's anguish, said God's mercy is infinite. If you truly repent, if you reject Satan and embrace Christ, there is always hope. Faust tried. He really tried. He began praying, the Lord's Prayer, words he hadn't spoken in 24 years. But he couldn't finish. His voice choked. His throat closed. And when he looked up, there was Mephistopheles, standing at the back of the church, silent, staring. Faust fled, ran from the church, from the priest, from the hope he'd almost allowed himself to feel. The priest later testified, "I have never seen such terror." He wanted to repent, his soul wanted it, but something wouldn't let him. Some force held him back. And when I saw the figure at the back of the church, I understood. That man wasn't alone. He was never alone. He's never alone. His demon was always watching, always there. A prison guard dressed as a companion. After that, Faust stopped trying to pray. There was no point. He was too far gone, and everyone knew it. Fake. The terror sets in. August arrived. 23 days left. Then 20. Then 15. Faust moved to the town of Staufen im Breisgau, where he rented a room at a local inn. The innkeeper later testified extensively about those final days. According to the innkeeper, Faust didn't sleep. He'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, occasionally whimpering. Sometimes he'd laugh hysterically for no reason. Sometimes he'd cry. Sometimes he'd just lie there, silent, as if already dead. He barely ate. The innkeeper would bring food, and it would sit untouched. Faust would sometimes pick at bread, but he'd lost all appetite. "What's the point?" he'd say. "In a week I'll be burning, forever. Why eat?" Visitors came. Some were curious. Some were genuinely concerned. Some just wanted to see the damned man in his final days. Faust told them all the same thing. Don't make my mistake. Whatever you want, whatever you think you need, it's not worth this. I had power, knowledge, wealth, 24 years of it, and I'd trade it all for one more day of life, one more chance at redemption. But I can't. It's too late for me. Learn from my fate. One visitor, a scholar named Conrad Gessner, tried to document Faust's final statements. He asked, "What is hell like? What have you seen?" Faust's answer was chilling. "I've seen glimpses, in dreams, in visions. Mephistopheles showed me to remind me of my fate. Hell is not fire, or at least not just fire. Hell is separation, complete, total separation from everything good, from love, from hope, from God. It's being alone with your regrets, forever, with no chance of redemption or escape. That's hell. And in 2 weeks, that's where I'll be." Gessner asked, "Can you escape? Can you break the contract?" Faust laughed, bitter, broken. "Break it. Mephistopheles said if I break the contract, he'll tear me apart now. If I keep it, Satan drags me to hell in 2 weeks. Either way, I'm dead. The only question is, do I want to suffer now or suffer forever? I've chosen forever, because I'm a coward, and that's the worst part. I'm too afraid to even choose my own death." By August 23rd, the day before the contract expired, Faust was barely coherent. The innkeeper said he was a shadow of a man, already more ghost than human, and everyone in Staufen knew. Tomorrow night at midnight, something terrible was going to happen. The inn at Staufen Day, August 24th, 1540, the last day of Faust's contract, the last day of his life. The inn at Staufen was crowded. Word had spread throughout the region that tonight was the night Faust's 24 years expired at midnight, and people wanted to witness what happened. Some came from curiosity, some from fear, some hoping to see proof that the supernatural was real, others hoping to see Faust proven a fraud. The innkeeper tried to turn people away, but Faust said to let them in. "Let them watch," he said. "Let them see what happens when you sell your soul. Let my fate be a lesson." Throughout the day, Faust stayed in his room. He didn't perform, didn't demonstrate his powers, didn't speak to anyone except the innkeeper. He asked for wine, strong wine, and he drank steadily, trying to numb himself for what was coming. But the alcohol didn't help. His hands still shook. His eyes still held terror. At sunset, around 8 p.m., Faust called the innkeeper to his room. He gave him a small leather pouch. "My last possessions," Faust said. "A few coins, some papers. If I survive tonight, return them to me. If I don't, burn the papers, give the coins to the poor, and pray for my soul, though I know it's pointless." The innkeeper took the pouch. Years later, he testified that the papers inside were covered in strange symbols and writing in languages he didn't recognize. He burned them, as instructed, but the smoke smelled like sulfur and made him ill. Witnesses gather. By 10 p.m., the inn's common room was packed. 30 to 40 people according to later testimonies. Townspeople, travelers, even a few local priests, there to witness the fate of a heretic. Faust came down from his room around 10:30. He looked like death, pale, gaunt, shaking. He could barely walk without support. He sat at a table. People gathered around. No one spoke. The room was silent except for the crackling fire and Faust's labored breathing. Finally, someone asked, "Are you afraid?" Faust nodded, terrified. "I've been afraid for 24 years. But tonight the fear is complete, because I know, in 90 minutes I will experience pain that has no end, suffering that has no limit, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it." A priest stepped forward. "It's not too late, repent, pray, God's mercy." "Is not for me," Faust interrupted. "I forfeited that right. I signed it away, in blood, and the contract is binding. Even God cannot save me now, or perhaps he chooses not to. I don't know which is worse." Someone asked, "Will the devil come for you? Will we see him?" Faust laughed weakly. "See him? You've been seeing him all day. Mephistopheles is here. He's always here. Right now he's standing in the corner, watching, waiting, Can't you see him?" People looked where Faust was pointing, at a shadowy corner of the room. Some later testified they saw nothing. Others swore they saw a figure, a shape that didn't quite make sense, a presence that made the hair on their necks stand up. One witness, a merchant named Hans Weber, wrote in his diary, "I saw something in that corner. I cannot describe it. It was not a man. It was not an animal. It was wrong. And it was watching Dr. Faust with something that might have been satisfaction." Indite approaches. At 11 p.m., Faust asked to return to his room. "I want to face this alone," he said. "I don't want anyone to see what happens." The innkeeper helped him up the stairs. Faust could barely walk. His legs were trembling, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. At the door to his room, Faust turned to the innkeeper. "Lock it," he said. "From the outside, no matter what you hear, don't open it. Don't come in. Promise me." The innkeeper promised. He helped Faust into the room, then closed the door and locked it with the heavy iron key. He returned downstairs. The crowd waited, silent, nervous, some praying, some drinking, all watching the clock. 11:30 p.m., 30 minutes left. People heard movement upstairs, footsteps, pacing, then Faust's voice raised, speaking rapidly in a language no one recognized. Was he praying, begging, casting a last desperate spell? 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes. The pacing stopped. Silence from above. An unnatural silence, the kind that makes you hold your breath without realizing it. 11:50 p.m., 10 minutes. Someone in the crowd started crying. Not for Faust, but from the tension, the weight of waiting for something terrible to happen. 11:55 p.m., 5 minutes. A sound from upstairs, soft at first, growing louder. Faust was screaming. Not words, just raw animal terror. The sound of a man who knows he's about to die and can't accept it. 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes. The screaming stopped, replaced by singing? No, not singing, chanting, in that same strange language. Faust's voice, high-pitched, desperate, speeding up as midnight approached. 11:59 p.m., 1 minute. Complete silence. Not just from Faust's room, from everything. No one in the common room breathed. No one moved. The fire stopped crackling. The air became thick, heavy, like before a storm. And then the clock struck midnight. The sounds from the room. Midnight. The 12th chime of the church bell. And then all hell broke loose. Literally. The sounds that came from Faust's room were, according to every single witness, unlike anything they'd ever heard. And remember, these were people familiar with violence, death, screaming. This was the 16th century. Life was brutal. They'd heard people die, but what they heard that night was different. It started with a crash, like furniture being thrown against walls, then breaking glass, then what sounded like the entire room being torn apart. And underneath it all, Faust, screaming, not crying out in pain, not calling for help, just screaming. Continuous, inhuman screaming that went on and on without pause for breath. Multiple witnesses testified to hearing other sounds mixed with Faust's screams. Laughter, deep, resonant, cruel laughter that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Snarling, like animals, but wrong, distorted, nothing that should exist. Wind, a howling wind, though outside was perfectly calm, and with the wind, a sound like massive wings beating. And throughout it all, voices, plural, dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all speaking at once in that same incomprehensible language. The innkeeper ran to the door, key in hand, ready to break his promise and help, but the door wouldn't open. Not because it was locked, it was, but because something on the other side was holding it shut. He pulled with all his strength. Others helped. 6 men pulling on that door. It didn't budge. Someone ran to get the town guard. Others ran to get the priest. But most stayed, frozen, listening to the horror unfolding above them. The screaming intensified. Faust was begging now, in German. "No, please, have mercy. I was deceived. I didn't know. Please, God, "Help me, anyone, help me." Then his voice changed. Got higher, inhuman, like multiple people speaking through his throat at once, and then the worst sound of all, bones breaking. Multiple snaps, like dry branches, and with each snap, Faust's screaming got worse, impossibly worse, until it didn't sound like a human voice anymore. The priest arrived and began praying, blessing the door, calling on God to intervene. The door remained shut. Inside, the sounds continued, crashing, screaming, that terrible laughter. For 30 minutes, it went on. 30 minutes that felt like hours. And then, suddenly, silence. Total, absolute silence. The inn itself seemed to hold its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. Everyone stared at that locked door, wondering what they'd find behind it. The priest stepped forward. "The soul has departed," he said. "Whatever happened is finished. Open the door." The innkeeper tried the key. This time it turned. The door swung open. What they saw in that room would haunt every witness for the rest of their lives. Then, silence. The room was destroyed, completely. Furniture smashed. Walls scarred. The window shattered, though it faced an alley too narrow for anyone to have escaped through. But the destruction was almost secondary, because in the center of the room was Faust's body, or what was left of it. Multiple witnesses gave testimony to what they saw. The testimonies are consistent, detailed, horrifying. Faust's body was twisted. His limbs were bent, at angles that should be impossible. His arms wrapped around his torso like he'd been wrung out like a wet cloth. His legs were reversed, knees bending backward. His head was facing the wrong direction, completely backward, like someone had grabbed it and twisted it 80 degrees. His eyes were open, wide open, staring, and in those eyes, witnesses said, was an expression of such absolute terror that several people vomited at the sight. His mouth was open in a silent scream, but his tongue was missing, torn out, and his throat showed claw marks, not scratches, deep gouges, like something had reached down his throat and ripped. The body was cold, already cold, though he'd been alive 30 minutes earlier, and it was starting to decompose, rapidly, unnatural. Within an hour, witnesses said, the body looked like it had been dead for days. But the worst detail, the one every witness agreed on, the smell, not decay, not death, sulfur. The room reeked of sulfur so strongly that people couldn't breathe. The smell of hell itself. And on the walls, written in what appeared to be blood, were words in Latin: contractus completus, anima collector, contract fulfilled, soul collected. No one had been in that room. The door was locked from the inside. The window was too small and too high to escape through. Yet Faust was dead, murdered, torn apart by something that left no trace except the devastation. The priest tried to bless the body. His holy water sizzled when it touched Faust's skin, actually sizzled, like water on hot metal. They tried to move the body for burial. It was too heavy. 8 men couldn't lift it, as if Faust's corpse weighed hundreds of pounds, though he'd been thin and wasted in life. Finally, they gave up. They left the body in the room, sealed the door, and called for help from the church authority. And in the morning, when officials arrived, the body was gone. Just gone. No trace, no blood, no evidence, only scorch marks on the floor where Faust had lain, and the lingering smell of sulfur that took months to dissipate. Breaking down the door, the official report, filed by the Staufen Town Council and preserved in historical archives, describes the scene in clinical detail. On August 25th, 1540, at approximately 7 a.m., the body of Johann Georg Faust was discovered in a locked room at the inn. The deceased showed signs of violent death. The room was destroyed. No perpetrator was found. No explanation could be determined. But the official report doesn't capture the horror. For that, we have to turn to eyewitness accounts. The innkeeper testified at length. He described how, when dawn came, he'd gathered courage to approach the room again. The door, which had been impossible to open during the night, now swung open easily. The room looked like a battlefield, he said. The bed was broken in half. The table was in pieces. The walls had claw marks, deep scratches, like from massive talons, and blood. So much blood. On the walls, the floor, the ceiling. How could one man have so much blood? But the body itself was the focus. Every witness who saw it described the same details. The unnatural positioning, limbs bent in ways that required tremendous force, bones broken so completely that they jutted through skin, the expression of terror, frozen on Faust's face, mouth open, eyes bulging, as if he died while looking at something so horrifying his body had locked in fear, the marks on his body, not just the obvious violence, but brands, burns, as if hot iron had been pressed into his flesh, and these burns formed patterns, symbols, occult markings that no one could decipher. The body was examined by a doctor, as was standard practice. His report, also preserved in archives, is medical and precise. The deceased shows multiple fractures. Every major bone is broken. The skull is fractured in 17 places. The ribs are crushed. The spine is severed at 3 points. The manner of death, extreme blunt force trauma, but the source of this trauma, unknown. The doctor noted something else. The injuries are not consistent with a fall, a beating, or any known form of violence. The force required to inflict such damage would be enormous, equivalent to being crushed by a collapsing building, yet the room shows no such collapse. I cannot explain these injuries through natural means. He also noted the condition of the organs. Upon brief external examination, we did not perform a full autopsy due to concerns about the body's condition. I observed that the internal organs appeared to have been disturbed, as if something had reached inside and rearranged them. And then this chilling note: I examined the body at 8 a.m. By noon, when I returned for further examination, the body had visibly decayed, not the slow decay of normal death, but rapid putrefaction. By 4 p.m., the body was unrecognizable. By the next morning, it had completely disappeared. I have no explanation for this phenomenon. Father Klaus Meyer, the priest who blessed the room, wrote to his bishop, I have witnessed evil, true, tangible evil. Whatever happened in that room was not the work of human hands. Dr. Faust sold his soul to Satan. I believed this was metaphor. Now I know it was literal, and I fear for my own soul, having witnessed such darkness. Hans Weber, the merchant, wrote in his diary, I came hoping to see a fraud exposed. Instead, I saw proof of hell. I will never doubt again. God is real. Satan is real. And the choice between them matters more than anything. I am changing my life starting today. The innkeeper, in his official testimony, I knew Dr. Faust for 3 weeks. He was tortured by fear, but he was also a real person, not a monster. What happened to him was brutal, beyond description. I pity him, but I also pray I never face such a fate. Whatever deal he made, it was not worth the price. Perhaps most disturbing is a letter from a young student who witnessed the events. He wrote to his family, I thought I wanted to study magic, to learn occult secrets. After tonight, I have burned all my books. I am entering a monastery. I will spend the rest of my life praying for forgiveness for even considering such paths. What I saw was not power, it was damnation, and I never want to be anywhere near it again. The consensus among all witnesses, this was real, not a trick, not an accident, not a natural death. This was supernatural punishment. This was hell collecting its due, and every single person who witnessed it was changed. Some became deeply religious, some became paranoid, some went mad, but none of them ever forgot what they saw that night in Stauff. The contract found ice. In the wreckage of Faust's room, among the destroyed furniture and bloodstains, searchers found something that made everything worse. The contract. The actual physical contract between Faust and Satan. Or at least, they found a document that appeared to be such a contract. The parchment was old but not ancient, written in Latin, formal, legalistic. The text, as recorded by witnesses before it was confiscated by church authorities, I, Johann Georg Faust, Doctor of Philosophy and Divinity, do hereby willingly and knowingly surrender my immortal soul to Lucifer, Prince of Darkness, in exchange for 24 years of service from the demon Mephistopheles and all powers attendant thereto. I acknowledge that I have been warned of the consequences. I acknowledge that I understand the terms. I acknowledge that this contract is binding, eternal, and irrevocable. Upon the completion of 24 years from the date of signing, I shall surrender my body to demons and my soul to hell, there to remain in torment for all eternity. I renounce God. I renounce Christ. I renounce salvation. I accept damnation. Signed this day in my own blood, Johann Georg Faust, and below the text, a signature, written in what was clearly old, dried blood, and next to the signature, a handprint. Also in blood, multiple witnesses examined this document before it was taken by the church. They all testified to the same details. The parchment felt wrong, like touching something dead, one witness said, like it had absorbed evil. The blood signature had not faded, despite being decades old. It looked fresh, as if it had been signed yesterday, another witness testified. And strangest of all, the document was warm, not room temperature, warm, like it had its own heat source, like it was alive. The church confiscated the document and reportedly destroyed it, but multiple copies of the text were made before it was taken. These copies circulated throughout Europe, terrifying everyone who read them. Historical records. The story of Faust spread rapidly. Within months, it was known throughout Germany. Within a year, it had reached Italy, France, England. And here's the remarkable thing. It wasn't treated as folklore. It was treated as history, as fact. Major figures of the Reformation referenced it. Martin Luther preached about Faust as a real example of damnation. Philip Melanchthon wrote about Faust's fate in letters to colleagues. These weren't superstitious peasants. These were some of the most educated men in Europe, and they believed Faust's story was true. Historical records from dozens of towns mention Faust. Court records, town council minutes, church documents, bills for performances, complaints about his presence, bans prohibiting him from entering. He was a real person. That's not in dispute. The question is, was the supernatural element real, or was Faust just an exceptional charlatan who died in a coincidentally horrific way? The evidence doesn't clearly answer that question, but it leans toward the supernatural being real. Too many witnesses, too many independent testimonies describing identical events, too many educated, skeptical people who examined the evidence and concluded something impossible had happened. The consistency of the account, details match across dozens of sources. The timeline is consistent. The description of Faust's abilities, his claims and his death all align. The physical evidence, the destroyed room, the impossible injuries, the disappearing body. These aren't the hallmarks of a natural death or even a murder. These suggest something else entirely. But most compelling, the impact. Faust's story changed people's behavior. It led to increased church attendance. It scared people away from occult studies. It became a cautionary tale that shaped European culture for centuries. Would a simple fraud have that effect? Or does the story persist because on some level, people believe it really happened? The documents from this investigation are preserved in Vatican archives, though they're not widely publicized. The investigators examined the inn and reached a conclusion. Dr. Johann Faust did willingly enter into a pact with Satan. He was granted powers for 24 years in exchange for his soul. Upon expiration of the contract, Satan collected what was owed. The death was not natural. It was supernatural. It was damnation made manifest. The church declared Faust's body could not be buried in consecrated ground. Even though the body had disappeared, a symbolic burial was held in an unmarked grave outside the town cemetery. Priests were assigned to pray for the souls of those who witnessed Faust's death, as exposure to such evil might have contaminated them. The inn where Faust died was exorcised multiple times. The room where he died was sealed and never rented again. Eventually the inn was demolished, and the land was consecrated. A detailed account of Faust's life and death, to be distributed throughout Christian Europe, as a lesson about the dangers of pride, ambition, and bargaining with evil. This book, published in 1587, was called Historia von die Johann Fausten, the Faust, and it became a bestseller, spreading Faust's story even further and cementing his place in history. The Faust book, 1587, and 1587, 47 years after Faust's death, a German publisher released the first printed account of his life. The Faust book, or The History of the Damnable Life and Deserved Death of Dr. John Faustus. The book was an immediate sensation. It went through multiple editions, was translated into multiple languages, and became one of the most widely read books in Europe, second only to the Bible. The Faust book presented itself as a true history, not fiction, not allegory, a factual account based on eyewitness testimonies and historical records. It detailed Faust's life, his studies, his pact, his adventures with Mephistopheles, and his horrific death. But it also added embellishments, stories that may or may not have been true but made for compelling reading. In the Faust book, Faust travels to hell while still alive. He sees the torments awaiting him. He meets damned souls. He witnesses demons tormenting sinners in creative and horrifying ways. He also travels to distant lands, to the court of the Turkish Sultan, to the New World, even to the stars. His demon servant makes all things possible, and Faust experiences pleasures and powers beyond imagination. But throughout the book, one theme dominates: regret. Faust knows he's damned. He knows his pleasures are temporary, and he knows his suffering will be eternal. The book presents him not as a villain, but as a tragic figure, someone who made a terrible choice and paid the ultimate price. The moral of the Faust book is clear. Don't be like Faust. Don't seek power through dark means. Don't trade eternity for temporary pleasure. Don't think you can outsmart the devil. And the book worked. It terrified readers. Parents used it to scare children into obedience. Priests used it in sermons. It became the ultimate cautionary tale. Marlowe's play, 1592. Just 5 years after the Faust book, English playwright Christopher Marlowe wrote The Tragical History of Dr. Faustus. Marlowe's play is based on the German book but adds dramatic elements. It's a tragedy, a theatrical warning, and it was performed to packed houses throughout England. In Marlowe's version, Faust is more ambitious, more arrogant. He doesn't just want power, he wants to rival God. He sees knowledge as the ultimate good, worth any price. The play includes famous speeches: Faust's opening monologue, where he rejects traditional learning, his conjuring of Mephistopheles, his final soliloquy as midnight approaches and he begs for mercy that won't come. The clock strikes 11. O soul, be changed into little water drops, and fall into the ocean, ne'er be found. My God, look not so fierce on me. Now draw up Faustus like a foggy mist, into the entrails of yon labouring clouds, that when they vomit forth into the air, my limbs may issue from their smoky mouths, so that my soul may but ascend to heaven. But the clock strikes 12, and Faust is dragged to hell screaming, as devils descend to claim him. Marlowe's play cemented Faust in English literature. It made the story accessible to audiences who couldn't read German, and it added layers of psychological complexity. This wasn't just a story about a bad man getting punished. It was a tragedy about human ambition, the thirst for knowledge, and the consequences of pride. Interestingly, Marlowe himself died under mysterious circumstances, just a year after writing Faust. Stabbed in a tavern brawl. Some people whispered that Marlowe had paid a price for writing about such dark subjects, that depicting demons on stage had invited demonic attention. Superstition? Probably, but the rumor persisted, and it added another layer to the Faust legend. Even writing about the devil was dangerous. Goethe's masterpiece, 1808, the most famous version of the Faust story, came over 2 centuries later. In 1808, German writer Johann Wolfgang von Goethe published Faust Part 1. Goethe spent most of his life working on Faust. He started writing it in his 20s and didn't finish Part 2 until just before his death at age 82. It was his life's work, his masterpiece. Goethe's Faust is different from earlier versions. It's more philosophical, more ambiguous. In Goethe's telling, Faust isn't damned at the end. He's saved, redeemed by his constant striving, his refusal to accept satisfaction, his eternal quest for meaning. Goethe's Mephistopheles is also different. Not a straightforward demon, but a complex character, witty, charming, almost sympathetic. He's the spirit that negates, challenging Faust to question everything, to never accept easy answers. The famous opening wager in Goethe's version happens not between Faust and the devil, but between God and Mephistopheles. God permits the devil to tempt Faust, confident that Faust's essential goodness will save him in the end. And it does. Faust makes mistakes, causes suffering, destroys lives, but his intention was always to seek truth, to improve humanity, to transcend limitation, and because his heart was ultimately good, he's granted salvation. Goethe's version became the definitive Faust story. It's been adapted into operas, films, plays, novels. It's taught in schools, analyzed by scholars. It transformed Faust from a historical cautionary tale into a universal symbol of human ambition and the search for meaning. But here's the interesting thing. Goethe's happy ending contradicts the historical Faust. The real Faust wasn't saved. He died screaming. His body was torn apart, and according to all historical accounts, his soul went to hell. So which version is true? The historical horror story, or Goethe's philosophical redemption? Maybe both. Maybe Faust's story works on multiple levels. As history, it's a warning. As legend, it's a tragedy. As myth, it's a meditation on the human condition. Or maybe Goethe just couldn't bear to tell the true ending. Maybe the historical reality was too dark, too hopeless, so he created a version where striving matters, where intention counts, where humans can be saved despite their mistakes. It's a beautiful idea, but it's not what happened to the real Johann Georg Faust. He died alone, terrified, and damned, and no amount of rewriting can change that historical fact. But what really happened? So here we are, over 480 years later, and the question remains, what really happened to Johann Georg Faust? There are three possibilities. Theory 1, complete fraudique. Faust was a charlatan, a stage magician, a con artist who convinced people he had supernatural powers through clever tricks and psychological manipulation. His predictions were either lucky guesses or information he gathered through mundane espionage. His magic was sleight of hand and misdirection. His death was simply an unfortunate accident, maybe even a murder by someone with a grudge, that got mythologized into something supernatural. Evidence for this theory. The 1500s were a superstitious time. People believed in magic, demons, witches. It wouldn't take much to convince them something supernatural was happening. And Faust was educated, intelligent, and charismatic, exactly the type who could exploit people's beliefs. But this theory has problems. Too many witnesses, too many separate accounts, too many educated, skeptical people who examined the evidence and concluded something impossible had occurred. Could all of them have been fooled? For decades? Theory 2, partial truth. Faust was a real magician, but not in the supernatural sense. He practiced natural magic, the Renaissance version of science. He studied alchemy, astrology, medicine, using methods that seemed miraculous to common people, but were actually early scientific experiments. He cultivated his devilish reputation deliberately, either to intimidate enemies or attract clients willing to pay for forbidden knowledge. The contract was a prop, the demon was a hope, but his death was still horrific, either a murder made to look supernatural, or a genuine accident that fit too perfectly with his legend. Evidence for this theory. Renaissance occultism often blurred the line between science and magic. Alchemists genuinely tried to transmute metals. Astrologers studied planetary movements. What looked like sorcery might have been proto-chemistry and astronomy. But this theory also struggles. If Faust was just a scientist, why claim to serve Satan? That's not good marketing. That's suicide. It invited persecution, investigation, and execution. No rational person would fake demonic connections in the 1500s. For 24 years, Faust had genuine supernatural powers granted by demonic servants. He performed real miracles. He accessed forbidden knowledge. He was, in fact, damned. And when his time expired, hell collected. Demons came to his room. They tore his body apart. They dragged his soul to eternal torment. The physical evidence. The witnesses, the historical records, all of it was exactly what it appeared to be: documentation of a real supernatural event. Evidence for this theory: the sheer consistency of accounts, the impossible physical evidence, the disappearing body, the marks on the walls, the sulfur smell. These details appear across multiple independent sources, and they're not the kind of details you make up. They're too specific, too consistent, too bizarre. But this theory requires accepting that the supernatural exists, that demons are real, that deals with the devil can actually be made. For many modern people, that's impossible to accept. So which theory is correct? We don't know. We can't know. The evidence is centuries old. The witnesses are all dead. The physical proof is gone. But the story remains, and it continues to terrify people, because on some level we all wonder, what if it's true? But the site is marked in Staafen and Breisgau, a small German town that's now a tourist destination partly because of its Faust connection. There's a statue of Faust in the town square, a plaque marking where the inn stood, and a museum with exhibits about the historical Faust and the legend that grew from his life. Locals will tell you stories about strange occurrences at the site, about people who've tried to excavate the area and found nothing but burned earth, about the smell of sulfur that sometimes rises from the ground on still summer nights. Are these stories true? Probably not. Likely just local color added to attract tourists. But maybe there's something there. Maybe the ground where Faust died really is cursed. Maybe evil that profound leaves a permanent mark. In the 1980s, a hotel was built near the site. During construction, workers reported strange accidents, tools disappearing, shadows moving when no one was there. One worker claimed to see a figure in the half-finished basement, a man in Renaissance clothing who vanished when approached. The hotel is now operating normally. No ongoing reports of hauntings, but during the construction phase, 3 workers quit, claiming they felt watched and unwelcome. One told a local reporter, "There's something wrong with that ground, something that doesn't want to be disturbed." Again, likely superstition. Workers looking for attention, or trying to rationalize normal construction problems, but the stories persist, and people keep visiting. Tourist historians, paranormal investigators, all drawn to the site where, maybe, just maybe, a man really did sell his soul and pay the ultimate price. In Erfurt, where Faust studied and performed, there's a restaurant called Auerbach's Keller. According to legend, Faust once drank there with students, and as a party trick, rode out of the cellar on a barrel that flew through the air. The restaurant plays up its Faust connection, but employees report odd occurrences: glasses that move on their own, a cold spot near the table where Faust supposedly sat, and occasionally late at night after closing, the sound of laughter from the empty cellar. One employee wrote online, "I don't believe in ghosts, but something is down there. I've heard it, I've felt it, and whatever it is, it doesn't feel friendly." In Wittenberg, where Faust challenged Luther's theology, people report seeing a figure in black walking near the old university buildings. The figure disappears when approached. Multiple witnesses have described the same sighting: a man in Renaissance clothing, walking with purpose, then vanishing into shadows. And in Staafen, where Faust died, the reports are most intense. People claim to hear screaming on August 24th, the anniversary of his death. Not every year, but often enough that locals have noticed the pattern. One resident told a journalist in 2010, "I've lived here all my life, and every few years, on that date, you'll hear something at midnight, screaming, coming from somewhere and nowhere. It lasts a few seconds, then stop. Is it Faust? I don't know, but something is making that sound." Are these hauntings real? Almost certainly not. Ghost stories are common around any historical site with a dark past. Human psychology is prone to seeing patterns and attributing supernatural causes to natural phenomena. But the persistence of these stories suggests something. Faust's legend has power. Even now, nearly 500 years after his death, people are still afraid, still wondering, still telling his story as a warning. Don't seek power through dark means. Don't trade your soul for temporary gains. Don't think you can outsmart evil, because if Faust's story teaches us anything, it's that some bargains, once made, can never be unmade, and some prices are far too high to pay. Back to safety, and you open your eyes. You're not in Staafen, not in 1540. You're here, safe, in your bed, in the modern world. It was just a story, a history lesson, a legend that may or may not be true. But here's the thing. Johann Georg Faust was real. The historical records prove it. He lived, he performed, he died. Those facts aren't in dispute. The question is, did he really sell his soul? Was the supernatural real? Or was he just an exceptional fraud who died in a coincidentally horrific way? You'll have to decide for yourself. The evidence is there. The witnesses testified. The church investigated. And the story has persisted for 5 centuries. Because something about it rings true. Maybe it's literally true. Maybe Faust really did make a deal with Satan. Maybe demons are real, and contracts can be signed, and souls can be sold. Or maybe it's metaphorically true. Maybe Faust represents everyone who trades their values for success, who compromises their integrity for power, who sacrifices what matters for what doesn't. We all make deals, maybe not with the devil, but with ourselves, with society, with ambition. We trade time with family for career advancement. We sacrifice health for wealth. We compromise morals for convenience. And maybe Faust's story is a warning about those deals too. About how the things we trade away, our time, our relationships, our souls, they can never be recovered. Once sold, they're gone. 24 years seemed like a long time to Faust when he was young. But it passed, and at the end he would have given anything for one more day, one more chance, one more moment of freedom. But there were no second chances. The deal was made, the price was paid, and hell collected what was owed. So as you lie there, safe in your bed, maybe think about the deals you're making, the compromises, the sacrifices. Are they worth it? Will you regret them? Will you look back at the end and think, I traded something irreplaceable for something worthless? Faust did, and his screams echoed through history as a warning. Don't be like Faust. Don't trade what matters for what doesn't. Don't sell your soul, literally or metaphorically, for temporary power. Because some things once lost can never be recovered, and some prices are too high to pay. Sleep well, and when you wake tomorrow, appreciate what you have, your freedom, your choices, your soul. They're yours. Don't sell them for any price. His death in Staafen im Breisgau is documented in multiple sources. Whether the supernatural elements are true or legendary remains a matter of personal belief, but the warning his story provides is universal. Be careful what you trade for power. The price may be higher than you think.